Why his earthly fame had a contradictory effect. Jesus understood the thoughts and feelings of people. He knew what went on in the human heart. If only his gospel had been left as he himself had presented it, with the sole commentary to closely observe the example he set with his earthly life. Then all nations and all religions in the world would soon have embraced the gospel of the kingdom. The well-meaning attempts of the first followers of Jesus to rephrase his teachings, to make them more acceptable to certain peoples or religions, resulted in corruption of his message. And what a victory looked like in the Roman Empire became a lose in later days and other parts of the world. Because their artificial dogmas based on their own zeitgeist fitted mostly the Greeks and the Romans, and were less acceptable to other nations, races, and religions. The Apostle Paul wrote many letters for instruction and admonition, and through these efforts, he tried to bring Jesus' teachings to the favorable attention of certain groups in his time. Other teachers of Jesus' gospel did the same, but none of them realized then that some of these writings would later be compiled and published as the embodiment of Jesus' teachings. And so, although Christianity contains more of the Master's gospel than any other religion, it also includes much that Jesus did not teach. Besides incorporating many teachings from the ancient Persian religions and much Greek philosophy, early Christianity made two major mistakes. The first mistake was the attempt to align the teachings of the gospel directly with the old Jewish theology. This resulted in the Christian doctrines of atonement, or the teaching that Jesus was the sacrificed Son, who had to satisfy the Father's strict justice and thus reconcile the divine wrath. This corruption stemmed from a praiseworthy but desperate attempt to make the gospel more acceptable to unbelieving Jews. Although these efforts failed to win over the Jews, they also confused and alienated many sincere souls in all subsequent generations from Jesus' message. The second major error of Jesus' early followers was the foolish mistake of structuring Christian teaching around the person of Jesus. This overemphasis on Jesus' personality in the theology of Christianity caused his message to be overshadowed. This has made it increasingly difficult for Jews, Muslims, Hindus, and other Eastern religious people to accept Jesus' teachings. We understand the respect for the person of Jesus in a religion that bears his name, but we do not want his inspired life to be overshadowed by this respect, causing his saving message to be obscured. The myth-making around Jesus has displaced his message about the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of men. By the time Jesus began the second preaching tour, his fame was primarily based on his reputation as a healer. But this slowly changed, and as time passed, people sought Jesus more and more for spiritual help. Physical healings spoke most directly and immediately to ordinary people. But increasingly, Jesus was asked for help by those who had fallen prey to moral enslavement and mental anguish, and invariably he taught them the way of liberation. Fathers came seeking advice on raising their sons, and mothers sought help in guiding their daughters. Those who sat in darkness came to him, and he revealed to them the light of life. He was always willing to listen to humanity's sorrows, and he always helped those who sought his assistance. Once the Creator incarnated on earth, it was inevitable that extraordinary things would happen. You should never approach Jesus through these so-called miraculous events. Learn to approach the miracle through Jesus, but do not make the mistake of approaching Jesus through the miracle. This warning is justified despite the fact that Jesus of Nazareth is the only founder of a religion who performed supermaterial acts on earth. Jesus' attitude toward women was revolutionary. In a time when a man was not even supposed to greet his own wife in public, Jesus dared to take women with him on his third tour of Galilee to teach the gospel. And he had the perfect courage to do this despite rabbinical teachings that declared it better to burn the words of the law than to speak them to a woman. In one generation, Jesus raised women from disrespectful neglect and slavish drudgery to which they had been subjected for ages. It is therefore especially shameful for Christianity that it lacked the moral courage to follow this noble example in its later attitude towards women. When Jesus mingled with people, they noticed that he was entirely free from the superstitions of that time. He was free from religious prejudices. He was never intolerant. There was nothing in his heart that resembled contradiction. While he adhered to the good in the religion of his ancestors, he did not hesitate to criticize the human-imposed traditions of superstition and slavery. He dared to teach that natural disasters, accidents, and other calamities were not punishments of divine judgment. He openly condemned slavish devotion to meaningless ceremonies and denounced the deceitfulness of a materialistic worship. Boldly, he proclaimed the spiritual freedom of man and dared to teach that mortals in the flesh are indeed and in truth sons of the living God. Jesus surpassed all the teachings of his ancestors when he boldly replaced clean hands with clean hearts as the hallmark of true religion. He replaced tradition with reality and cast aside all pretensions of vanity and hypocrisy. Yet, this fearless man of God did not indulge in destructive criticism, nor did he show a total disregard for the religious, social, economic, and political customs of his time. He was not a belligerent revolutionary. He was an advocate of progressive evolution. He only began to dismantle the old when he could simultaneously offer his fellow humans the better that ought to be. Jesus' followers obeyed him without him demanding it. He had a special attraction to people, but he was not dictatorial. He demanded trust, and no one ever resented him for giving this command. He allowed his followers to call him master. He assumed absolute authority over his disciples, but no one ever objected to it. Jesus was admired by all who came into contact with him, except those who harbored deep-seated religious prejudices or those who saw political dangers in his teachings. People were astonished at the originality and authority of his teachings. They marveled at the patience with which he addressed slow, troublesome questioners. He inspired hope and confidence in the hearts of all who received his ministry. He was only hated by those who embraced the old, entrenched system and were determined to maintain it at any cost. He exerted a strong, particularly fascinating influence on both friends and foes. Large groups of people followed him for weeks, just to hear his gracious words and observe his simple life. Devoted men and women loved Jesus with an almost superhuman affection. The better they got to know him, the more they loved him, and this is still true. The more men learns to know this God-man, the more they will love him, and the greater the desire to follow him. This remains true today, and will be for all future times.